Hi, Lee.
Hey, you two.
Hey,
How you doing?
folks. Good.
Yeah, good.
Long time no see since we skipped
Cancelled
the
the last one. Yeah.
August meeting. How you guys doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
Yeah, great.
It's,
And I think that is the discussion around the relaxation of the field merging might be interesting.
I definitely agree. I'm when I read the example Yvonne gave in that spec PR, it's like, man, that's clearly wrong. We got to fix that. I think the tricky part is knowing if the fix is the right fix, but yeah, super interesting. I got a message from Matt Mahoney saying that he may be a little bit late. And so I think that's the other major thing for us to dig into, which is a little bit sad because that's the one that we punted from last month to this month. I think all the crazy hurricane rainstorm that the East Coast has gotten provided some flood damage to his house, so which sucks.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Dealing with the contractor right now to figure out what a cleanup process is going to be.
Oh my God.
That sucks.
The world is falling apart.
Yeah. But the Bay Area is still working.
Mostly still working. Air quality is not so great today. I think there's a big fire near Lake Tahoe, which is about a 4-hour drive from where we are. And I think the wind is blowing down in the direction of the Bay Area.
Right.
But that's the worst we have to complain about. That, and it never rains here. So we're just like, we complain about drought. Meanwhile, the East Coast of the US is like under a foot of water. So
yeah, it's essentially the extremes. Also, I read Chicago has problems now with rising waters.
totally wild. Hey Camille, how's it going?
Hi everyone. Didn't
Hey.
want to interrupt.
So looks like based on the pull requests, we'll have a light attendance, which is totally fine. And like I said, Matt's going to be a little late if he's able to join. So maybe we'll stick it out for a couple minutes just to at least get, I assume Yvonne will join since he added his agenda.
Could you pop up a Google Doc, please, Lee?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I need to like add something into my calendar that just reminds me to do that. Just the one step simpler than writing a shell script that does it. It's a shell script that just reminds me to do it.
Yep.
I'm still the human in the loop.
Need to refer to the old XKCD chart. I do this one time per month, and it takes me how many years of my life will I save?
That's right.
Used to have that printed on the wall. It's a really useful chart to stop over optimizing things like, you know, I'm automating this, but it's taking longer than I'm going to get out of it.
I'm in the middle of writing a blog post about not over optimizing, but over generalizing.
Mm-hmm.
See if I ever publish it. Okay, I've got a doc. Now let me just add it here. Right file. All right, I just added a link to the agenda file.
Thank you.
All right, we're about 5 minutes in, so maybe we'll get started. And since we have a fairly light agenda today, I'm hoping that we can do a little bit more of a deep dive in action items, since usually we whiz through those and there's like a little over a dozen that have been there for a long time. So hopefully that's a good use of our time. Oh, hey, check that out. We just got a bunch of people at once. Sweet. I have new pull requests? I do. Hey, Yakov, I see your pull requests. I'm gonna merge it now.
Thanks so much, Shai.
Yeah, thanks for sending that. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let's get started. All right, light crew today, but that hopefully will just streamline things. All right, as a quick reminder at the top, by participating here, of course, we all agree to the membership agreement, participation guidelines, and code of conduct. Links in the agenda file as per usual. Go check those out if you want to get a closer read. Let's do a quick run through of attendees. Hopefully that'll be quick and easy since there's only a handful of us. Hey everybody, I'm Lee. We'll go to, I think, Yvonne, you're next in the file. If you're...
Hi. Yeah, hi, my name is Ivan. Something happened with my camera. So I will be as a black box, represented by black box today. And biggest news, 3 weeks ago, I joined Apollo. So now I work in Apollo. On positive note, it's like split between foundation work and Apollo work. So I'm on Apollo, currently on Apollo server team, open source Apollo server team. And I will continue to do foundation work as part of Apollo.
That's awesome. Congrats on the role change. I don't recognize your location today. Where are you right now?
Turkey. So me and my girlfriend were like on resort in Turkey.
And yet you're still calling in here.
Yeah, dedication.
That's awesome. I've been to Turkey once and it was beautiful. So you'll have to tell us about it.
Yeah, really beautiful. Yeah. Hopefully we'll have some GraphQL conference and we'll meet each other face to face and I will show you photos.
Sounds great. We actually are talking about doing an in-person GraphQL conference in the middle of next year. I'm sure there will be others too. I don't know when the others will move back to in-person, but I can tell you all about that more in a little bit. All right, next up, Benjy.
Hi everyone, I'm Benjy. I work on the GraphQL suite of open source tools and have also some slightly out of date GraphQL spec changes that I'm trying to find time for.
Next up, Camille.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm Camille, currently in Warsaw, in Poland, and I work with Ori. I think you know I'm part of the guild. So yeah, we basically do consulting and a lot of libraries and tools around GraphQL, pretty much. And it's my first time in this working group, so yeah.
Welcome, glad to have you. I see Matt's next in the list, but he's going to join a little bit late. So Morris, you're up next.
All right, I'm Morris. I'm from IBM. I have several different GraphQL things I'm interested in. We work on a GraphQL proxy, so we sit between the client and server and therefore have to know all kinds of things about that different people intended from GraphQL. So we're interested in various spec issues. Anybody talk to me if you want to talk more.
Yeah, hi, I'm Michael, and I work for Chili Cream, and we are basically working on the .NET implementation of GraphQL.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And I see Benjy is already hard at work translating the agenda into a notes file. Anybody willing to jump in and help with note taking, especially if Benji's going to engage in some discussion?
I can help.
Awesome, thank you. Find the Google Docs link at the top of the file if anybody else wants to jump in and help out at any point. And thank you, Benji, for being our note-taking lead as per usual. Much appreciated. Okay, let's take a quick look at our agenda, which is fairly lightweight, and just make sure this is covering everything we want to talk about today. Three major things. One, we're going to go through the action items. Since we do have a light agenda, I want to go through our backlog of action items a little bit more time than we would usually spend, just to see if there's anything we can't divvy up and just kind of get done. The fulfilled meta field discussion Matt wanted to have. Matt said that he may be able to join a little bit later, so we'll probably just move that to the end. That way he's here to lead that discussion. If he's not able to make it in time, we'll just punt it to next month's again. And then super interesting pull request that Yvonne put up on field selection merging. There's one thing that I do want to add that I'm going to add to the agenda now. There's a discussion that Andrew Ingram posted in the working group channel in Discord early this morning. And he and I had a little bit of back and forth right before the meeting started. And so I'll drop a link to that. It's about what we should and shouldn't allow directives to do, which I think is quite interesting. So if we have time, I think it would be interesting to talk about that. Anything else that we want to talk about here? Oh, hey, Matt, good timing.
Hey, I may have to jump out if I have a contractor coming to deal with the flooding issue. Yeah. What's up?
We just got to intros, so you've missed basically nothing.
Oh, perfect.
I suggest that we skip over the previous action items for now to give Matt priority.
Yeah, let's do that. Just adding that link to the Discord discussion here real quick. And we can do that. So yeah, Matt, since you're here for now, let's jump into the fulfilled discussion.
Yeah, so the background behind the fulfilled discussion was basically at Facebook, we've been moving more and more to having fragments be the unit of like how people interact, how client developers at least interact with GraphQL. So we've moved almost to the point where like when you in your client code are accessing some child fragment, you have to explicitly do like a dot as this child fragment in order to be allowed to start accessing those child fragments fields. The fulfilled label was meant as one potential way that we can basically allow us to say, hey, this fragment is deferred right now, or this fragment was not deferred, we can actually access it. We're allowed to convert into it. So we discussed on Discord last month, and like I'll put the alternative Lee proposed was basically using keyed fragments or keyed fragment spreads of some form. And I think that is that like basically ends up matching exactly with how we do fragment like spreads at Facebook. So that was an interesting discussion.
Just so the fulfilled meta field essentially it tells the consumer if the server has decided to honor the defer, for instance.
Yeah, you can use it for things like that. Basically, the fulfilled meta field all it says is that this selection set that I'm on was in fact fulfilled.
Okay.
So long as the executor enters that selection set, then fulfilled will be true.
Okay.
Another way to think of it is a meta field which always returns the value true.
Yeah. And so the a long-term vision of why we might want something along these lines is that we're trying to make it so that the rules that require you to basically introspect on an entire document or have knowledge of an entire GraphQL document in order to say whether your fragment is valid in that document. We would like to basically eliminate all of those so that you could know directly at the fragment spread level whether you should only ever have to go one level deep in order to validate. So if I have a fragment A and I'm spreading a fragment B, I should be able to know, hey, this spreading fragment B is valid here for any query that spreads A in a valid way.
But as I understood it, we always return true for it when the selection set is set. So if I have it in two selection sets, I don't know which one is fulfilled.
Correct. So that was the reason to add. To be fair, this RFC may be ahead of itself, where there might be a required RFC for allowing, for instance, canonical named responses in order to allow overlapping fields with the same arguments. And this RFC is once you have that, requiring a label basically for the fulfilled field and saying, hey, this is the fulfilled field with label foo, would tell you, okay, I got specifically this selection set as opposed to a different one.
Yeah, I mean, it essentially would also work if you use an alias at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Any other questions or comments? Because, yeah.
Yeah, I think the main purpose that I see for this is so that the client has an easier way to tell if the server has essentially delivered on a certain fragment. I mean, you could also test this in a more complex way, but this is making it simpler.
Yeah.
So
I have
go ahead, Ivan.
Yeah, I have a question because I think it's a little bit too generic. I think it's maybe too generic for a task at hand. If you do aliases on a field, maybe a way forward is to list name, just have a field that return list of strings with names of fulfilled fragments. I think it's equally complicated. If you give unique name to aliases, you can give unique name to fragments. And we can, because I recognize this as a real issue, I just think we adding some generic and broad thing to solve this problem. And I don't see it being useful for something else. So if we creating solution, maybe we should narrow it down to specific problem at hand.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's yeah.
I'd like to understand why you can't already do this with type name and aliases.
Yeah, so you can. It is possible to do with type name and aliases. It's the issue being if we start doing this in many, many places, the cost of that additional type name in the response is actually relatively high. Like one argument for using an underscore fulfills field as opposed to keyed fragments is that the fulfilled field is almost necessarily less expensive in terms of like the overall response size, because any duplicated fields in the response will not get duplicated, whereas with the keyed fragment they would be. With type name, you absolutely can do this with type name. It's just more complex, and especially the fact that you're asking, does this field exist, indicates the response probably shouldn't have a string as the response. It's like it's kind of an idiomatic mismatch. But for like being able to have this behavior, that's exactly what we do today. Like that's what Relay does in some instances. That's what various clients do.
That's a cool idea, though. The idea that if the main semantic fulfilled is that it's a field that always returns true, then like really the value that you derive from it, aside from the semantic, like what it means semantically, is that you have a field which is inexpensive to query and gives you a known value, which type name also satisfies. And so if the main thing that you get from it is to have different aliases at different levels in the query, you can essentially polyfill, for lack of a better term, this behavior by using an existing meta field.
Yeah.
I mean, from the response sizes could even be smaller, right? If we just sent an int or something. I mean, it's more explicit with the bool, but from the JSON response size, it would be.
Yeah. One interesting thing here is recognizing that GraphQL says nothing about, or does not say that like the response needs to come in JSON format. It uses JSON as the examples of how the response would come back, but like it is valid to have a GraphQL implementation that works, for instance, with flat buffer formats, or basically whatever arbitrary formatting you want. And in a sense, the underscore fulfills meta field is a way, like the problem that it's trying to solve is basically in a JSON response, keeping that JSON response small while simulating keyed fragment responses.
Mm-hmm.
And given that, I probably I don't think that this RFC is like that we've actually explored the solution space for that problem well enough and like have enough clarity to push this RFC forward beyond a straw man.
Are you guys already using it in experiments
for
Relay? Or?
So we are experimenting with a canonical response format, but our actual client interactions behave via alias format. So we're basically experimenting with this, and for the canonical format, we are using a field very similar. We haven't named it underscore fulfilled, but yeah, basically we've broken the response format in this experiment.
Interesting.
Do we expect this kind of, like, I wonder how tightly is, so I understand the general problem, which is you want to have an understanding of which fragments were or were not included during the execution of a query, which becomes especially more useful when you introduce stream and defer. How much of this do we expect human authors to write versus how much do we expect this to be the output of a build tool that like takes the human authored query and then, like, similar to, I know Relay inserts type name in a bunch of places that the human did not put it.
Yeah, this is probably, I would expect 98% plus of this usage to be build tooling usage, and the 2% that isn't is like human people using it in a way that build tooling would use it if they were using build tooling.
Cool. That's helpful because if the intent here was to give human authors more understanding what's going on, then we would want to optimize for semantics and understandability. And if that's not the intent, then we should optimize for just satisfying the use case in as simple a form as possible.
Yeah. One thing that the discussion did bring me to was kind of an interesting thing where the fact that GraphQL is not a like wire format spec, it can be used as a wire format spec, but it is not like inherently one. Leads me to believe it might be useful to have a few, like, to have an optimized wire format spec for GraphQL somewhere. And if we had that, it would be interesting to, like, if we had that and all GraphQL servers and by default clients supported that optimized spec, that might give us more leeway to do things like keyed fragment spreads, that where the like access pattern is inherently not optimized if that was the JSON response format, but like the actual cost for the optimized response would be pretty low, or there's like a way to translate to and from the optimized response.
Mm-hmm.
I see what you're saying.
So essentially, like servers that flattening the JSON, we would also do optimizations on the response.
Yeah, and there's probably a really large space of potential like solutions optimizations. Do we like potentially like giving the client it in like a response where it's key, like it's more like a graph in format rather than a tree or something like that. Like there's a lot of potential options to explore, and that would be interesting to explore, but that would be a much larger.
Yeah, there are some not necessarily wire protocols, but just like derivations of JSON that allow you to do this kind of thing. Like I think what you're talking about here is the key limitation of JSON is that it can only represent a tree and it cannot represent a DAG. And if you want to say this value, which appears in two separate locations of the tree, is like identically the same value, and therefore I don't want to repeat it, like you can't do that. If you are forced to represent your DAG as a tree, you have to duplicate it. I don't know that we have enough, like, does the spec give us enough metadata to even produce? Like if you wanted to go experiment and say, hey, I'm gonna go like make not like a GraphQL specific wire format, but I'm gonna go use one of these wire formats that lets you reuse subtrees. Can you, like, is something missing from doing that? Because that would kind of be an interesting side experiment. That wouldn't force GraphQL into the path, but at least make it such that we could like start to codify that behavior somewhere.
Yeah, I think an example of being able to do something like that would be the relay store format provides, like, you could provide server responses that exactly match the relay store format that response is going to get serialized to. And yeah, so that is a like potential way of jump starting the discussion. But
Stephen has his hand up.
Yeah, when you're talking about the kind of a normalized transport of a Falcor JSON graph format, which is basically kind of doing that over the wire. But then on the other side of it, just as far as like binary, like flat buffer or thrift or CBOR, do we know, is there prior art that is kind of like in production widely known that anybody's doing that? Because I've always wondered, because I mean, it seems like a natural thing that's made do at some point, but I just haven't seen it. I'm wondering, does anyone know that?
There was one effort at Facebook to use flat buffers as the response format, basically at the time that GraphQL was being open sourced. But so I imagine most people don't, because it, one, adds a lot of complexity, and two, you only start seeing results when you have incredibly deeply nested complex responses. Like, I think at the time that it was open sourced, Facebook's like gnarliest query was like 30 levels deep in the tree or something like that. And it's grown significantly worse than that now. But like, unless you're hitting that scale, even JSON that has lots of duplication probably mostly doesn't matter for you.
I think gRPC has this concept built into it in terms of like another example. Like protocol buffers allow you to represent a DAG rather than a tree. So I'm pretty sure gRPC has some smarts in it that take advantage of that.
Interesting.
Don't quote me on that. I might be wrong, but that's my understanding.
Just one question:
Yeah.
Is there a reference to the relay store format?
I don't have that reference offhand. I could dig it up. That might be a task for me to dig up.
Yeah, I would be interested in. So if you have.
Yeah.
Just spitballing a little bit, trying to think of other uses for this kind of field. There have certainly been times when people want to see like constant strings in a GraphQL schema, and obviously you can return that with a field. But having something that was, for example, like effectively the identity function, like you feed in an argument and you get that argument straight back, could actually enable quite a lot of possibilities whilst also solving your problem. It wouldn't, however, do it as a Boolean. It would be as a fixed string, but it would be the fixed string that you feed in as a client. So in an optimized wire format, maybe, that would just be fixed string number 1 or something like that.
Yeah, I think I brought up this example in the Discord discussion we had last month after we decided to move the meeting just to live discussion. I haven't thought through all the implications of it, but I think it's an interesting idea. And it feels like one half of a whole conversation of like, what are the things that we should be able to alias? Right now, the answer to that is we alias fields that we can query, but like, what if you could alias? I like the idea of thinking about it as an identity function. That's a cool idea. And maybe an interesting way to kind of do it without adding any new syntax, which is cool. The other would be, Matt, I think you already thought about this, like aliasing the fragment itself such that you like chunk out a subset, it's like pretty obvious if that fragment is included because the field in the response body would be there or not be there.
Right. All right, and this is exactly what we do like for our clients right now. I just didn't realize that that's what I was doing when I made the client.
Can you speak a little bit more about the label part, the label argument? Because I'm not sure I understand the purpose of that piece.
So the label argument, the reason I included it is that's in a world with canonical responses, the response doesn't have aliases at all. Like there are no aliased keys in the response. The response is instead, like even if you have an alias, the response is my field with arguments. And the label is a way for you to basically, as an alternative to aliasing, a way to differentiate those fields. In an alias-based world, it probably doesn't have very much value.
Got it. So that's a specific feature to handle a constraint that the relay store provides, which is aliases is a runtime concept and not a store concept. And so you want to make sure you're not losing information. But like maybe a server, would the server need to then, like, would you maybe model this in a way where if you were going to support this on a server, the server doesn't need this label information since it is an alias-based world. So you like format the query in that way, but then the relay store has its own internal information to make sure it's representing them right?
Likely that would be, if we didn't have the label argument to send to the server, that's likely correct, yeah. The other thing I kind of wanted with this was, assuming we had the field, is the naming, the field and it worked in this way, does the naming make sense, or is there like an obvious better name for __ fulfilled and / or the argument label?
That's a good question, because I feel like the main reason that I'm gonna push on this one for us to find alternatives is actually it is hard to come up with a name that clearly describes what's going on here. Fulfilled implies, even if it's a Boolean, that it could or it may or may not be fulfilled, and therefore false might be a reasonable value. But actually, you can't ever get false. It's like definitionally, like if a field is queried, then it's fulfilled. And so that I think is just kind of inherently confusing just from a semantics point of view. And like, if this is the path that we want to take, like I actually kind of prefer something that just makes it more clear that this is just like a value that is always true, but which makes me think like, I don't know that this is necessarily the right way to go about this. In terms of like the intent, fulfilled, I like the naming, you know, like if we were going to do this, if we were going to find a variant that said, hey, I want to know at this level, at this like sub-selection level, what are the fragments that were fulfilled? That naming would make a ton of sense, right? Which I know is not necessarily the path that you think is the right one, but just goes to show that the name I think does hold up for some variation of this.
Okay, cool.
One other value, which I think is obvious, but it's worth stating anyway, of having the label and in fact making the label non-nullable, is that it's going to basically make you use the aliases so that you don't accidentally merge these together. So that's worth stating, I think.
Yeah, I actually think that's a super important point. And a downside if a human never writes these out, that you can easily write a query that you think is giving you the right metadata and then realize that you've actually like lost it. So kind of a subtle foot gun.
Yeah.
Okay. My sense is that the next step is to go broad. Like we now know one pretty clear path that would solve the inherent problem. I think the inherent problem is very interesting. Like how do you know what fragments were included in a particular query execution, whether that's like a static query execution or one that in the future could include different stream. But I think we need to more reasonably explore the other alternatives just to
I agree.
be able to weigh A against B.
You're right. I think the like next step might be like actually just more straw mans. More, yeah.
Sweet. Nice discussion.
Thank you.
Let's bounce backwards one step in the agenda and do some action items. I took a quick look and I'm pretty sure we don't have anything ready for review right now, but in the all open action items, there are currently 14 open action items. So I thought maybe it'd be worth just going through these a little bit and seeing if any of these are stuck, if any of these are just kind of floating and waiting, or if we can like do something about some of these. And let's see, do we want to go through these in based on which thing is most recent or which thing is the oldest and most rotten? There's one in here from September 4th, 2020, which is now officially an entire year old. Create a PR merging policy and grant more contributors maintenance access to the working group repo. That's a year old now. I think this implies that the action item is on me. Yep, based on this issue. Do we remember the context here? And is this a thing that we've done?
Yeah, I think if I'm not confusing with other action item, idea was that it was based on input union situation and other active RFC of that time, and problem that we need to give every time we need to give commit access, and it's not like usually people creating big RFCs, we trust them like because they're active, but at the same time put pressure on them, like not to screw things up in spec repo. So idea was, I think Lee suggested it, that we move RFCs into working group repo and make it more like making commit access right easier to obtain. So basically, if you after RFC, we give you commit access and you can like change anything in folder of your RFC, something like that. This was the idea. So moving RFCs out of spec repo into working group repo and figure out like some short description of how this process look like. Should we like revoke commit rights, or should it, like people have it indefinitely, things like that?
I remember this discussion, but we could also, to have it more clean, have a separate repo for that, where we really have a more open repo, GraphQL RFCs or something like this.
I would suggest not to create more repos because it will confuse people even more. I think RFC process is inherently connected to working group agendas and stuff, because like we process stuff. Plus, on the plus side, if a person open working group repo and see like folder with like finished RFCs or merged RFCs, he can see path forward and he can see good examples of how stuff is made. So I think it's like connected because entire FC process is connected to working group, so it makes sense in the same repo. Plus, person cannot like break or screw something up, or it's not security vulnerability if he changed something in a working group repo. So less risk and less problems.
Okay. This is great. Thank you for folks with better memories than myself. I'm taking a couple quick notes just in that issue itself, which I just added. So I will do both of those two things. I'm going to move the RFC directory into the working group repo. I think actually semantically that makes sense. I'm trying to remember why we had it set up that way. I think we initially ran the working group out of the spec repo, and maybe that's the case, but it kind of makes sense that we would have the shared like notes files and RFC files that we're working on together here in the working group repo. So that makes sense to me. And that should allow us to add plenty more people with commit rights to this repo. And the other thing that I put in here is I'm gonna write a little bit to the README file. The README file in the GraphQL spec repo, we probably need to completely rewrite that at some point anyway. It's like a big explainer on GraphQL, and that's probably the wrong place for that now that we have a website and a spec and like a bunch of other places where we would want that information. But in the meantime, we have a much healthier README in the working group repo. So I'll update that. Oh, and last one that I'll add to this to-do list is to add a bunch of contributors via a team. Okay, sweet. I will handle that post meeting. Next oldest is update agendas to recommend adding the GitHub username because that makes it hard to tag action items. And then we said we loved that idea, and then we never updated the agenda template, did we? Let's just, okay. I'm not gonna waste your all time and do this live, but this one seems pretty straightforward. I will do this for the, I think October and November templates are open still. Here's the like real stupid thing that I think I should do. Let me know if this is dumb enough to work. The one line that's in every agenda is the line with my name. I will just edit it so that it says it's just a link and it's going to be still my name, but then it'll just be a link to my GitHub profile. And then hopefully people will see that. And when they copy it, they'll like copy the format.
Rather than making it a link, can you just add, @Lee afterwards? Because it makes it easier to reference it and copy rather than having to like, hover it and see what the link is and such.
Yes. Yep. Better idea. Okay. Okay, I will also do this one post meeting. That one seems very straightforward.
You're doing old, aren't there a couple older action items, 488, 477?
Yeah, maybe I have this in whatever I have this sorted by when they were last updated, not when they were created. So yeah, you're totally right. Let me sort by.
I mean, I don't mind whichever order.
Oldest. No, totally. You're probably following along, being like, why the hell is he jumping all over the place? Okay, yeah, I actually sorted by created ascending. So September, so there's a couple of these that are all a year old. Let's see if we can't just like not end up with multi-year-old issues or action items. License is missing in the scalar subproject. Is this still busted? Who do we have that's that are helping maintains the scalar subproject? I'm noticing a
think-
trend where a lot of these are stuck on me. So
Yeah, I think Benjy.
the scalar and yeah. And it's a bit the problem, I think, was the so Andy is solely doing it, but the problem with the scalar is that it's not prominent enough. We are not pushing people towards it. It would have potential, but if we don't promote the website or something like that, it just has the daytime at the moment. But we could put the URI would be a possible thing to put there, and others. Well, also there's, for instance, the GeoJSON scalars. I think every server implements them a bit differently. Would be a potential thing to move there.
Right. I do think it would be a good thing, but it doesn't even have the daytime now, right? Andy's old site separate used to have it. The current GraphQL scalars. Like I go to the. Sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
Doesn't it have it anymore? GraphQL scalars dev or I think com is the right one. GraphQL scalars com. The other one is the scalars that the guild is building.
So,
there are two
websites. Andy's website had it, but a year ago we made the GraphQL Foundation, GraphQL or GraphQL Scalars repo, and that's the one I think.
The link. I posted the link.
Yeah, I think I remember a bit context on that. So we started separate working group on scalars, and we have a lot of bike shedding about stuff. And I think the last thing we stuck was how to give unique URLs to proposals. I was like for doing just sequential numbers like RFC and something super simple. Other people have other ideas. And I think it was Steam because we had like we tried to over-engineer it instead of doing something simple.
But Ivan, I think the proposal how it is very good because you can put a new URI in there and link to like it could be a link to the RFC, the actual RFC of the URI or stuff like this.
We need some document in this repo, and we need to reference it somehow. So like idea was a folder, but the question is not about that. The question was what I tried to say is like Andy and like others had the initial push, but when we lost it in like with small details, so maybe it's worth to have concrete goals like getting daytime somehow. Since it's unique URLs, we can change like format ledger and keep like daytime as like one of. So idea, I don't know, like maybe contact Andy and ask if he's still interested in project as a whole.
I think one of my issues with this in general, I think, is GraphQLscalars.com doesn't seem like an official thing. Like it could be run by anyone. Having scalars.graphql.org, I think, would be better because it makes it very clear that that is the canonical source for them.
So Benjy, that's what Ivan was talking about. Is we met like a year ago and discussed that, and that's when we made this new repo. So the one I put in the chat, it's GraphQL GitHub/GraphQL Scalars. And Andy also agreed. Andy wanted to agree that it should be at somewhere where no individual company or individual person, is the source of failure for that existing. And so, better, and if people search it, to be there. And that's what Ivan was talking about, that there was an idea that maybe under there we'd put just like any individual or company could have their own subdirectory under there and put their own specs, which have no commitment from the GraphQL Foundation, but it's just out there as a central repository to look for it. But that's where I was saying that one still has not gotten the daytime. It's still got absolutely 0 specs in it.
But I think one of the advantages is that anyone can just create a spec in any quality, and if it's picked up by the community, it's easy to build into tools. Or if we hinder the evolution on those specs, I think we also don't get a lot of traction on it. So I agree with there should be a central place, and this should be owned by the GraphQL Foundation. But I don't think every scalar spec has to have the same quality as the real spec.
Yeah, I think there was general consensus around that, agreeing with you, Michael. So I think the idea was a central place. And then that was why I think one of the ideas was that each person or company could get their own subdirectory named after them under the main directory, which means it's up to, it's up to them whatever quality they have. And yes. Like you said, the idea was it was a central place to look for them, not an arbitrator of which one's good or which one's bad.
Yeah, and the idea, because then we could really use these things in tools as a reference. So if a GraphQL server says it has a scalar that is specified by this spec, a tool could support it if it decides to. But at the moment, this is hindered because nobody knows about this page. I'm in issues referring to this website at the moment from Andy, and we are also referencing our datetime to that, but there's just this datetime, and it doesn't get any traction because it's not owned by the GraphQL Foundation.
Okay, to bring this back to the action item, this is a little bit of a cart before the horse, right? The real problem is that we have a project which we would like to have some life breathed into it, and instead what we have is a repo with the README file in it. So the license is not really the thing that is blocking here, and there is actually an issue open in that repo to make sure we add some like contribution guidelines in a license. So I'm going to call this done. And really the like next step for that project is to make sure that it gets some maintenance attention and that we build it up to be the thing that we want it to be. And as we do that, I suspect that we'll get the licensing figured out. And like super clear point, I think it's right that like the license that applies to the project, GraphQL Scalars project itself, may or may not apply to all of the scalars submitted in there. People are just saying like, this is a link, right? Like if we want to treat this like the NPM of GraphQL Scalars, then obviously people can submit their scalar specs with whatever license they want. So I'm going to close this issue on the working group, and this is now officially on the plate of whoever picks up the mantle for that project. All right, what do we got next? We've got, did we already do this one? GitHub infrastructure for managing working groups?
It was my idea. So I think it's like partly done. It was back in the time we discussed GraphQL.js working group, because we had like bunch of GraphQL.js related questions on main working group. So we decided to spin off, and it exists. It's not as big as this one. Usually we have like 2, 3, 4 people, sometimes 5, but it serves purpose and it's happening every month. We recreated volunteers, created repo. So idea was twofold. First, create like this JavaScript working group, but in the process, make it easier to create more working groups. So idea was to create a template repo for working group. Because like every time people, I think like GraphQL have a working group, we had like one for GraphQL over CDP. So every time people copying pasting repo, and it's hard to clean up all the reference and fix all the links. So idea was to have like GraphQL working group template repo, something like that. This part is not done. So I don't.
Okay, I think we can close it. Like, it'd be one thing if we were opening like new working groups every month or two, and this was like a problem for us. But there are a handful, but the creation of a new one is fairly few and far between. My thought is a template repo might be a little bit overkill, and it's probably okay for us to manually assemble one for the needs of each of our sub working groups as necessary. So this was ready for review almost a year ago. I think that was probably accurate. So close it.
What was the issue number for that, please?
Oh, sorry. Let me reopen that tab. 477.
Thanks.
And okay. Once I finish that other, the other one we already talked about, then we should be closing out last September's set of action items. Boy. Okay, talked about that one. We still have open an issue for alternative meeting times. What do we want to do with this? The last time we talked about this was last March. I feel like every time we talk about this, we come to the unsatisfactory conclusion that there's just never a time that can collect everyone. I remember last time we talked about this, we talked about doing a time that would basically rule out US attendees, but would be a good time for Europe and Asia. I'm still okay with that. I feel like if that's going to be the case, and I'm not going to organize it because it'll be in the middle of the night for me.
You have changed the time since you opened the issue, right?
Yes, we shifted 2 hours away.
Yeah. So we
So
did
I
take
think
an action on that action item.
Yeah, I think it's made it more manageable for Andy. Original issue, like to our broader contribution, but factual issue was it was too early for Andy, and we move it. It's still like I think it's latest for me at the moment, so it's ending at 11 p.m. Usually for me, but it's still like okay. So I'm happy with that time, and it's allow Andy to join. I don't remember, like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., which is early, but also kind of manageable. So I think right now we have like kind of optimal time. The most optimal time we can do with one working group without splitting to different working group for different time zones. So I think we tried and we made some adjustments, and if it traced in future, we can think about some more complicated stuff like splitting it up. But I think for now it's good as is, especially since like we have on this call we have 6 people, so we split it up. We were like two calls with 3 people or something. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to drop a note on the issue just so that if folks spot it, they know why we're closing it. So I will close it since we did, in fact, shift the time by 2 hours. That doesn't necessarily mean by closing it that we won't set up a future time that works better for the Asia time zones. Cool. Technically resolved, but still doesn't feel great. I know Andy would prefer to be able to join more often. Next one, links to stories, blogs relevant to the spec release. I am going to cut the spec release this month. That's coming. this didn't get a ton of traction. So I think my new game plan for this is we will fast follow. So the original intent with this, when we assembled it up in March, because this was like right before we started the process to the spec cut, was if we had blog posts that we wanted to kind of release those all around the same time. That way, as people are going like, oh, wow, a new GraphQL spec release, like they just see a bunch of relevant blog content. My thought now is that a waterfall model is more likely to have impact, where what I'll do is I will have my blog posts that goes along with the spec cut this month. And then anyone that wants to write a more detailed blog post is absolutely welcome. And I'll use the GraphQL Twitter account to signal boost anything y'all want to draw attention to. But I think I'll just close this since it didn't get a lot of traction. Does that sound okay with everybody? Cool. Done. Where does that land us? There's one from March. There are a handful of these from March that says, add a non-normative note that a GraphQL request is not the same as an HTTP request. And this is assigned to you and me, Benji.
Oh no.
You have to leave this open. I don't think we did this.
Yes, indeed. I don't recall us doing that.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it open. I suspect there's like a swath of editorial things that we might want to get to again after the spec cut. So leave that one open. There was another one. This is also from March. Benji, this is related to your RFC that was moved to a draft around coursing field arguments. We were looking for implementers to make sure that there was nothing that was totally going to break.
I believe this is still something that people are struggling with. I believe it's still causing... I'll say this. No one has said so far, yeah, this is great, it works perfectly fine.
What was the issue again? I didn't catch the beginning.
So basically, because of the change to the default value coercion that we were talking about, where you treat a value not as if it's already coerced, because there are kind of things that assumption breaks. Like, for example, things can be null when they are expected to not be null because they have defaults or something like that. We were basically proposing changing a small part of the GraphQL spec text to make that more clear. Lee has made an initial pull request to, well, I say pull request, it was a series of pull requests, if I recall, to GraphQL.js to implement that, which ended up going a lot deeper than I was expecting it to go. So thank you, Lee, for doing that work.
I think the stack is still open. So at some point, I'm going to have to come back to these and clean them up and get them ready to land.
But of course, that also means that there are probably going to be similar changes needed in other GraphQL implementations. So I'm really hoping that some GraphQL implementations like have a go at implementing this and then say either, yes, we can implement it, or no, we can't implement it. And here is a compelling reason why. Because I think this is the right direction for the GraphQL spec itself. Like, I think it is a weird behavior that we currently have that eradicating would be good for GraphQL in general. But if we're not going to be able to do it, then we need to just accept that the status quo is what it is and maybe put some guardrails in place so that these problems don't surface. Like, an alternative solution might be to change some validation rules, for example, for the schema. But I think that the route as currently proposed and as is implemented in Lee's pull requests is the right direction.
Okay.
For what it's worth, we have had a handful of folks respond to that ping on the implementers list and give some feedback. Benedict, Spania is his username, who helps maintain the PHP library, said he voiced his support for this, said that it was going to be challenging to implement there, but it was the right thing because he's seen people get bit by this. Also in that thread was Evan. I know Evan's shifted his job around recently, so I'm not sure exactly where he stands with the Ruby stuff, but I know that he had some specific questions on how Ruby might implement this and was asking Robert Masalgo, who helps maintain that, but I haven't heard anything from them since then. I think we're all have come to the conclusion that the change is the right one. So actually, I'm going to suggest closing this particular issue that is now 6 months old. Because I think we did this. We pinged the implementers. And I will do one last ping to implementers on the actual change, because I'm hoping to come back to this, get it cleaned up and ready to land.
Yeah, I have to reference it now to our paper, so I will have a look at it and see what it means for us.
Cool. Saw that reference from you, Michael. Okay. Well, then I am going to close this one. All right. If we're only looking at stuff as far back as March, that makes me feel a little bit better now than the action items. I think there's another one here that is a spec clarifying editorial. Add prose to explain why scalar fields must have the same type when composing fragments. I'm going to leave this one open because I think that one's going to require a little bit of a deep dive. And implement one of input objects in GraphQL JS.
Yeah, I've not got around to that yet.
Okay. This is just related to advancing your RFC for that.
Yes.
Cool. Then we're into April, about doing a deep dive in the Google Summer of Code and whether or not we should be applying for Google Summer of Docs. I'm assuming the timeline for Summer of Docs is long gone. I assume Brian dug into this. I will close the action item, but I have a bit of time with Brian later today. I'll make a note to bring this up with him, just to dig in before next year. Anything else we wanted to talk about for, I don't blanking on our conversation from April around this. I guess it's self-descriptive in the action.
Yeah, I think I brought it up. I don't remember why, but the idea was that, yeah, the situation was strange and just to know what to do. So action items was like an answer for me. Should I apply for seasonal docs or not? But yeah, since I'm right now doing, starting a new job, I'm like overburdened with bunch of stuff in Apollo and day-to-day stuff with GraphQL, so I cannot apply anyway. Yeah, so it's answer. It would be great to know like an answer. What happened? Maybe I can like fix something or do better like next year, but maybe it's something unrelated. Yeah, so knowing the answer would be helpful. But in general, I think, yeah, it's solved issue.
Sounds good. I'll bring that up with Brian And I think in general, it's a good idea. I think usually we're just kind of late to it. By the time we realize that that's coming, then we end up scrambling and then not writing as good a proposal as we could. So my suspicion is that that's what's happening. But yeah, I'll ask Brian about it. The next one is to scan our repos for outdated Facebook copyright notices. We opened this in April. I think I did this. It's entirely possible that I've missed something.
Yeah, I did a scan since I saw this issue right now, and I scanned like 5 minutes ago, and we still have, if you search for Facebook in GitHub, you see Swappy have it, and GraphQL.org repo still have it, and maybe some others. I just quick scan a few couple of pages for like Facebook result. I think it can be put even broader. So like even if readme say it's Facebook project, we need to replace it. Basically scan for Facebook. And if it's in test, it's okay. If it's historical notice, it's also okay. But if it's a license or like readme or some other important general things, yeah, it's still there. One issue I discussed with Brian. Brian said like, ideally, the person who wrote license file will change it, or representative of organization will change it to have like a legal clean room on that. I don't know. I think like if that makes sense, they use the best person to ping somebody from Facebook to change license, or maybe just change it. I'm not sure what to do with like licensing things. I don't think Facebook will sue GraphQL Foundation at any point of time, but yeah.
Okay. Hopefully this is another one I can follow up on after meeting. At the minimum, I will do the GraphQL.org ones because I'm pretty sure I'm the one who wrote that code. So that fulfills the issue you're talking about. Are we up to June? Whoa. Query level nullability. This is assigned to Alex Verili, so I think I'm gonna leave this.
Yeah, I think he's working on the JS implementation, and that's like the next thing. It's not done yet.
Cool. And then this last one is on you, Benjy, a GraphQL.js pull request preventing skip and include on subscriptions, which was related to a proposal RFC as I think another next step for that particular RFC. I assume that's just still open.
Did I do that?
I don't think so. As far as like right now, we're reviewing PRs for dredging PR for new release of GraphQL.js. I think I saw it. One thing I can help you with that. I did like a couple of validation rules recently. Like I did one for argument uniqueness. So I think it would be easy for me to write. That's pretty simple rule. If we just want to forbid skip. I don't think we have RFC for spec, PR for spec.
Yeah, we've got an RFC, a spec PR for it. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, so if you want, you can just ping me and I will like create PR for GraphQL.js.
Okay, yeah, cool, will do.
Okay, I think we did it. We just made it through all of our historical issues. We started with 14 open. We have 8 open now, and a handful of them I've taken notes on how to resolve. So a third close just by doing a scan, another third we will fast follow on. I'd call that a great success. Let's move on. Let's talk about field selection merging. Yvonne, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so it's a real issue from Apollo. They do, if you open, I can send the link, or if somebody have it open right now, can you send the link into chat? So we're all on the same page, because I actually posted a real life kind of example in issue itself, Spectre, yeah, thankfully. So if you open it, you will see SDL describing the schema, and basically you have interface with nullable field and type that implemented port. It's non-nullable on string, but the other type keep it as nullable, and it's allowed by type system because we use covariance. Covariance. So you can add non-null to when you implement interfaces, field on interfaces, and everything works good if you write a query. And there is example of query, just query interface. But if you do inside this query, if you do inline fragments with concrete types, you break validation, because currently validation says type should match if fields non-mergeable, like entire thing with overlapping fields is problematic, as we discussed in like MET agenda items. But here it's like it's corner case of current implementation. I think it's fixable. Problem is that it doesn't allow you to do covariance, which is strange, because this transformation should be safe, and it's safe in like 99% time, except this one. So it's work with union interfaces, like it work with interfaces, implementing interfaces, everything work except one with one particular case when you add no somewhere, and it can be no inside like list, it can be no like on top level, but if you add like no, you break with margin rule. And what's more important, it's actual issue with Apollo Federation. At Apollo, we do this transformation. I'm not really sure why. I have suspect why to federate different servers, and it's discovered by a client, and people at Apollo thinking what to do. Hopefully, now I can bring this, instead of them trying to figure out some workarounds, I can bring this question issue to working group, and maybe we can fix it, because I think it should be possible. Like this transformation should be possible, and it's like this current behavior is surprising, and it's easy fixable. I'm on vacation, so I had time only to between like swimming in sea and have a dinner in the restaurant. I managed to put PR to spec, which is super simple. I think it's changed like 4 lines of spec text, but the matching PR for GraphQL JS would be like actual changes would be like 3, 4, 5 lines. But we need to add like a couple of tests. So change itself is pretty simple.
It's one of the most complex rules in the spec.
Yeah, I agree. That's why people at Tapo, my colleagues at Tapo was like surprised it's not fixed. So they assume it's something complex. It's something like beyond their understanding. Why they assume like, but explain them it's just like the most complicated piece of code in GraphQL.js and the most complicated, probably the most complicated algorithm in spec. So nobody wants to touch it. So I expect people having this issue, but just trying to work around it or doing something else. I don't think the Apollo is the only company doing like transformation like that.
The question is, if we anyway want to change it a bit. I mean, there was this a while back, this request from how's she called from Twitter? I forgot her name now. Solomon.
Sasha.
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 Sorry. Yeah, Sasha. To anyway relax it a bit more, and that I think would greatly simplify the whole algorithm. It would fix this problem, but it would also reduce the complexity of this whole algorithm greatly. I mean, I remember Lee explained why they made it so strict, but nowadays the clients kind of all do dunder type name underneath and figure out that this actually are different types and can put that on differently generated types. I think that was with the result format you explained that you used in the Java clients back then. Why it's so strict.
The reason why it is strict is you want to be able to accurately model the type of the response shape from a GraphQL query. And knowing that many clients have a limited subset of type checking tools at their disposal, there's a whole class of languages, including Java and Objective-C, which happen to be the two original consumers of the GraphQL servers at Facebook, which don't have the capability of describing union types. So they can say this field is a string, they can say this field is an int, but they cannot say that this field is a string or int. It's just not an easy thing to do. So you can do the thing where you have like a really complicated set of nested interfaces where you try to split them apart that way, but you end up with extremely complicated client code to try to model this idea of a union type. Modern languages do this, but older languages don't.
The question if you can push that on the client that generates the code. I mean, Relay doesn't allow all kinds of query syntax elements, so you are also limited to the stuff that Relay allows you, and so could other clients. So with that, we could really simplify the whole algorithm and would also get rid of this this issue.
I definitely think that's interesting. And you're right, it would certainly simplify this. There's another argument to be made for keeping it beyond just the support for those languages, which is a simplified understanding of the response, right? You write something that you at first read think is straightforward, but then you get payload results that are confusing. So there's like this other scenario where you're consuming the results in a untyped language and therefore relying on a human to make sane judgments about what field types can be reasonable. So a good example of this is Python, like Python and Ruby, even Python and Ruby as consumers of GraphQL. They don't have first-class type systems at all. And so they rely on a human to say, given this GraphQL query, what's the shape of the thing that's going to come back? And then can I operate on it? And you can imagine a mode where someone subtly screws that up and they end up with overlapping field names or aliases that return string or number, and then try to do some like number math and end up doing implicit number coercion and like introduce scary bugs in their code base. That's like, this is kind of the backing rationale. This particular change that Ivan is proposing, I think is very interesting because it's limiting the the it makes this rule less strict, but only limited to the union of a null type and a regular type. So, and that's like a special class of unions in every language ever. Like, Java doesn't give a shit about nullability in the first place, nor does Objective-C. So like they're SOL anyway. Languages that do have union types treat nullability in a special manner. So like that, and like even humans thinking like this is a field that can or can't be null, like they don't think about that the same way they think about a union type. So
I don't like in C#, a nullable struct, like a nullable int, is a different type than an int. So it's wrapped in a generic class. So there is a difference, a compile time difference in that.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think I'm not against this change. I don't raise anything here. I'm just saying there are also things that you have to work around there, and I think it would put more to the client to decide if the client can consume that. And then, I mean, most GraphQL clients that I know, I could be wrong, are generated. So it would put the power into the generator of this validation.
The part of the intent in this for the human legibility is you should be able to look at any particular field that'll result in the payload, figure out what the type of that field is, and then know that that's the type that's going to be in your response, right? And that's essentially what this algorithm guarantees. And this would loosen it, right? Like you can imagine encountering the field in Yvonne's example of the, what's in the example, the country code being nullable in one case and not in the other. So you'll look and be like, a port's country code is required. So I know that country code is definitely going to come back. And like, obviously in this contrived example, they're right next to each other, but you can imagine one where one is a named fragment and therefore it's in a completely different file. And you look at it in that file and you see it's nullable and you like make a false assumption. So I can definitely see how it could create confusion, but hey, Stephen, your hand's up. I'll let you talk.
Yeah, so this is similar to the question that you asked Lee in GitHub, and basically is this allowing this type of covariance with non-null, is this enough on its own to like unlock additional use cases, and if not, then is just the bit of extra complexity and kind of edge casiness that it adds, is it worth it to add it?
So one thing to note is how fragments work today. Anytime you have a fragment spread where you switch up the type, you already have this potential issue. Like anytime you have a fragment spread where that type might not be fulfilled on the client, you need to treat that field as nullable, right? So which gets back to, if you want to be able to access the field in a non-nullable way, you almost need something like keyed fragments or some way of saying
aliases.
I got this. Yeah.
I just remember another PR that also can fix that. It's where you essentially can state that you want this field, you want to change the nullability of the field. And this would essentially make this explicit that you want to see the country code as nullable in that case, which is a great PR. I can post it later when I find it again.
That's the required PR, right?
Yeah, where you can change the nullability of fields, and that is actually very good for things like schema stitching, where you might want to batch things and then mark different sections as nullable so that it doesn't erase your result when you do something like federation or stuff. Which would, if we don't want to change that, that would be a way to also get rid of that issue.
My argument to that is, I think, is different type of proposals. So other proposals like named keyed fragments is more like feature request. Relaxing rules at all is also kind of feature request, and mine is more like a bug fix. So a question here is not like, is like, if we decide to replace this mechanism like at all, there is not a problem to temporarily patch it. So my question here, like to move discussion forward, is actual items, actual problem we need to deal in Apollo right now. So teams that work on Federation ask me what to do, and my idea was, if we as working group recognize it as a bug, we can fix it in reasonable time frame, and instead of like doing something vendor specific or trying to find like complex solution. So can we return back to is it like because like time frame for something like keyed fragments or relaxing rules, we need to ask like implementers, we need to ask like people who generate SDKs for like clients. So time frame for that is like half a year probably, how things is done, and it's unpredictable if we have champion for it at all. On the other hand, this is pretty simple issue, and we can make decision in like move it to stage 1 this month and merge something into GraphQL next month. So to kind of yeah. So my question is, if we recognize this as a bug, basically, because for me this transformation should work, and also it's like what Lee said about being surprising for a client. I agree with that. On the other hand, it's surprising when you think about it in the case of interfaces. So like it's the same interface. Why I cannot ask with fields into named fragments? I can imagine person writing the same query by hand and being surprised. So yeah.
Well, so in this case, I agree. But what is with if it's a union?
So if do you mean like covariance? If it's a union and
because
if
then
it's a union,
different.
Yeah.
It's different fields. Different fields could have different meaning.
Yeah.
And then the client might not expect that they are nullable because they're by coincidence. I mean, it's.
Or even just using the same alias on 2 fields. So I pick 2 completely different fields. One of them happens to return string. One of them happens to return non-null string. I alias them both with the same alias in 2 fragments.
Yeah, it's an issue.
I mean, with the interface. With the interface, you could also argue to essentially put the fragment in this case on the interface, and it would work. I'm just arguing the downsides. I'm not.
Mm-hmm. It's an important distinction because the actual spec change proposal here actually has nothing to do with interfaces, right? It's about relaxing the same response shape algorithm to allow for nullable and non-nullable fields of the same type to be considered the same. which is not quite the same as saying two fields which implement the same interface and that are, covariant to one another, can be merged.
Yeah, because it's
so
not it's not the exact. So in this case, where the field is the exact same field, so you're implementing that field, it would always lead to no problem. That's exactly what I wanted to.
So if I change it to this address with specific use case, one thing to leave the argument why we have complex rules at all is to represent it at CodeGen. CodeGen can figure out it's like combination of nullable, non-nullable, and covariance representable in any like type system. You can say just nullable. If you have non-nullable and nullable, common version is nullable. So if we apply this argument about representable in client type system, this is like easy win. On the other hand, if there is opposition to that particular change, I can restrict it to interfaces. But validation rule became a little bit complex.
I personally don't think it makes sense to just limit it to interfaces. I do feel like any client, so my argument about any client kind of has to deal with this already is an argument for this probably does no harm to existing clients, because like if you have multiple fragment spreads of different types and one of them has a field and another doesn't, well, in your CodeGen, the field access has to be nullable in some way, right? Because it might not be included in the response. And
That's
this
true.
is just now it might be included in the response, but null doesn't seem like a meaningful, like a significantly meaningful difference between those states.
Yeah, that comes back.
It is in JavaScript.
Oh yes, undefined.
Undefined, yes.
In JSON.
Like it will come back different, but like the client already has to handle one of those cases. It doesn't feel, I mean, yeah, maybe there are clients for which this would break because now instead of guaranteed undefined or set or non-null, it's now undefined or null or set.
Yeah, but anyway, I think most clients really rely on the type name. Anyway, because like when we generate a client in C#, we also generate inheritance and stuff like that, so you can drill in.
My main concern with the actual implementation at the moment seems to be that it strips the nullability from the entire stack of a type. For example, if it was a list of something else, like a list of strings, then the inner type can be changed, I think, as it currently stands. If I'm reading the repeat from step 3 correctly. Is that something that we actually allow with interfaces? I thought that we didn't.
Yes.
But it is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I studied it. It's I actually spent like hour today going through all use cases, and I think it's the only thing missing. So interfaces have like back to list question inside there. So the only thing that missing right now is no. Everything else is working just by coincidence. Like I think no one checked like what thing when we did interface implementing interfaces or something, some other stuff, but it's automatically working on all composite types just by the way how this rule written. So the only issue is non-null. The only issue that I like figure out by reading two algorithms is this one, and that's why it was surprising. Nobody it's worked with Apollo Federation, I think, for a long time until one of the clients ran into it.
And the GitHub schema, for instance, is using these kinds of nullability changes a lot. Like in the interface, it's nullable, and then they make it more concrete on implementations.
Going back to your question before, Ivan, is this a bug? I don't think this is a bug. I think it's unintuitive, but I don't think this is a bug. I think this is actually the constraints that we've put in place working as advertised. It's just that in this particular example, it's maybe a surprising constraint to find. But it points out that there is actually, since when you implement an interface, you can implement it covariantly such that you can supply a more strict version of the type of a field. There's a difference between querying a field on an interface versus querying a field on a specific implementation of that interface. They don't give you the same type. They give you a potential covariant version of that type. So I don't think this is a bug that we need to think about how to go fix the bug, but it certainly is unintuitive. And that, I think, should help guide the conversation, where we're not patching something not working as advertised. It is working as advertised. It's just not in this particular example, not very clear. Which then I think circles back to the paths forward that we were talking about. And I think there are three paths forward. One path forward is the null case, which is we all agree that this is unintuitive but working as advertised, and we make no change. The second path is we make some decision about same response shape being more strict than we would like, and decide to make that more like covariant response shape, or make nullability not part of the definition of same when it comes to same response shape. Or the third is that we introduce a specific carve out for when two fields implement the same or come from the same interface, which this is already a complicated algorithm that might make it a little bit more complicated, but that's certainly a path that we could take. Is that right? Or did I get the right three paths here?
Yeah, I agree. It's like the three option. I personally prefer number two. I don't like number three, but I can live with it. I think like not recognizing this as an issue will add to a list of non-intuitive things, and unless we came up with something more unintuitive that we introduce, I think it's better to address these things. But I'm interested to hear what others think in like this realm of these three options, because I want to move it forward. Either like we think how to address it like differently, or we see like path. I mean, like from Apollo standpoint, with like see path forward to the spec, or we see how we can fix it another way. So I'm interested to hear like what other people think on these three options.
I lightly favor the first option, which is make no change. Really how I'm thinking about that is the primary impact that this will have is on any downstream tool, which is doing type generation. This essentially loosens a assumed constraint that those tools will have, and can generate, like they currently could be generating code that assumes a field is non-null, and this would allow a null through there, which could lead to null pointer exception failures for that existing code, which is like
one thing. We don't change anything because like queries that use this feature is invalid right now, so they don't pass in validation.
Right.
So,
The point, I think, isn't existing queries, but existing
Future
clients
queries.
operating on new queries, right? Because you don't need to upgrade your client. You've upgraded your server.
yeah.
And now now your client is allowed to write a query against the server that's valid, but you get a null pointer exception on the client.
On what point?
That's what I'm worried about. Yeah, I'm imagining a piece of code generation, client-side code generation code that says, okay, at this point, I assume that your query is valid because some tool upstream from me would have rejected it. Now, given that it's valid, I will do type generation for you, which my understanding is how most of the code that I've seen before that does the code generation works. And so it'll look at that and say like, yeah, this is a valid query. And now I'm going to go generate my types, and it will make some assumption about the return types there and potentially get it wrong. Not to say that those aren't bugs that could be fixed. It's just, it makes it like not a cleanly safe change, because it requires fixing assumptions in other software.
Yeah, the question is the change worth doing it? I mean, is it so impactful that we must do it?
Right. That's why I kind of loosely favor making no change. But I think what would be compelling is how frequently does this kind of confusion point surface, and how complicated is it to resolve? If this is like a serious, and like you mentioned Sasha's conversation before, it's not the first time we've talked about this restricting being a limitation. So maybe the right thing to do is sort of bring it back to that discussion and say, how, if we did want to loosen this, how loose would we want it to be?
I would
that way, rather than it feel like a. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No worries.
But I would also like to go in that direction more, because then explore, instead of patching something that is very complicated and a lot of things rely on, is exploring what makes sense to change, and does it make sense even to widen it further, and then come to a decision, but not in a rush.
Yeah, it changed my point of view, because when I was presented with this case, I thought it's like 100% bug or something unintentional. I just assumed interface implementation rule should match with overlapping fragment, because they like 90-something% match itself. So without context, knowing how spec was written, at that time I assumed it was intentional that they like so close to each other. So I assume it was like the only missing thing, it's a bug. But now I understand it's not a bug, which make stuff harder to decide and reason about. So initially I thought it's slam dunk. That's why I allocated 15 minutes and wrote for PR with 4 lines changed.
For what it's worth, Yvonne, when you dropped your message to say, hey, please take a look at this before the meeting, my immediate response was also, oh, wow, this looks like a bug that we should fix. And then only after like really thinking about it hard, they realized like, oh, no, actually, this is one of our constraints working as it's designed to, but this is a very confusing edge case, which is why I say I'm loosely favor making no change. But if we were to loosen up our constraint on response shapes, this seems like a reasonable place to loosen it such that it actually would unlock otherwise confusing behavior. So I'm not going to block further pursuing the path, but I do think Michael's guidance here is very smart to, instead of thinking of this or phrasing it as there is a bug with how we think about inline fragments for implemented interfaces, but instead reframe it as what if we generalized the constraint that we have on same shape to allow variability in nullability, because that is then the superset, right? It's the exact same structural change you're proposing, but we can then zoom out and think of like, what are all the other implications of that change, and rather than just the specific issue that you flagged in your example.
Yeah, so to move forward, question, should I generalize it in a way that Sasha generalized? Like, really, like basically saying there is no like constraint, or we okay, we start relaxing it step by step?
I'm personally okay relaxing it step by step, or rather, I would say I would be very dubious of the idea of completely removing it. Whereas I think your proposed change here is very kind of sharp and smart in that it specifically narrows in on nullability being sort of a different class of response shape variation than just like general any field can be a union of any scalar or object, which feels much more dangerous to introduce. And it might make sense to do like a little bit of analysis there, like what's the kind of the range of removing the constraint and like what makes sense to do now. And doing one doesn't mean that we could never do the other ones later, but it makes sense. I like the way you think about that in terms of structure.
Okay, so the question is more about messaging implication and thinking about consequence for ecosystem. Oh, okay, I get it. But in case of like RFC process, so I think like stage one is basically we recognize the process as something valuable. So basically, I will consult with the team and see how to approach it better. But because I still think even if we decide to do some alternative solution, for meantime, I think it's valuable. So for next time, I will try to prepare GraphQL.js PR and speak with people working on client. So it's easier for me now because Apollo have iOS and Android clients code generation, so I have direct access with the people on the same team. Yeah. So question is, can we move it to stage one to like basically agree that this is a problem we want to see how we can fix?
Yeah, I think that's okay. All right, that wraps us up almost exactly on time. I'm gonna drop that last agenda item that I added at the last minute anyway. So I'll just leave y'all with a note to go check out the discussion that's happening there in the working group channel. I thought it was pretty interesting. And otherwise, hope everybody has a good rest of your day. Thanks for the hard work, everybody. See you all next month.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, you.